Good evening. Thank you for joining us for another of our TeleArtworks online lectures. Before we begin, I should like to give you some information about the Atelier at Flowerfield, a 501(c)(3) not-for-profit organization. We're currently finishing our Spring 3 session, and we'll be starting our Summer 1 session on July the 12th. That's the week of July 12th. That will be a 4-week session. We offer a variety of fine art drawing and painting classes in a variety of mediums, both online and in studio. And we're also offering some summer youth camps for children aged 6 to 12 and one-day workshops for middle and high school students. All of that information can be found on our website, theatelieratflowerfield.org. We offer classes in both oil painting, watercolor, pastel, and also some digital painting and graphic novel design. Our new exhibition is called Breakout and runs from July 1st to August 26th. Tonight's lecture demo is being sponsored by First Republic Private Wealth Management. And tonight we welcome Lana Ballot, who will be giving a lecture and demonstration on pastel painting Seascape. We welcome her this evening. We hope you enjoy tonight's lecture demo. And if you wish to ask questions, please put them in the chat room. We'll try and answer them as you go along. And I shall now hand over to Lana Ballot. I hope you enjoy everything. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. And I believe my window is supposed to get pinned so it shows larger. Oh, here I am. Okay. All right, for some reason I don't have my feed in the main window. Okay, I think now it started. All right, today I am going to show the painting of a wave. So this is a better picture than what I could print here, but it's pretty much, except like some of the gradient dropped out when I was printing, but that's the view. And the reason I picked it, it has a nice composition. I have a few diagonals that will balance each other. And I also have a chance to show that beautiful feature that everyone is wowing about when they see it. It's translucency. And of course, I have also a little bit of that spray happening. So that's another little eye candy moment here. So I will be looking at my iPad when I'm painting, and here it's just kind of a little bit of a reference to see what I'm doing for you on screen. And I'm going to set up my recording on my side and we can start. So I am working on an Art Spectrum paper. It's a special paper for pastels and it's rather gritty. There are different types of paper for pastels, and this particular one has quite a bit of texture, which is nice when I'm having in mind painting a spray over the background water, because I don't even usually have to use anything else but just kind of work on the side of the stick and achieve that spray there. And right now I will start with the underpainting. Underpainting is a special technique when we work with pastels. If I just start working on a sanded paper, let's say, that lighter texture, lighter color is going to show up through. when I will take a brush and dilute it, I will create more even tone, and I can actually customize different areas of the seascape with different values, or it doesn't have to be seascape, can be anything. So that's the reason why I use underpainting quite a bit in my work. And now I'm just going to start blocking in the color. Even though it has quite a bit of foam here, the foam will be added later. So first I'm just going to get this overall gradient of the wave, and I'm going to work with the darker value at the bottom of the wave. And I did this preliminary sketch as well, value study. Let me show it to you maybe closer so we see it. Set it up. Okay. So here's my value study, which always helpful to kind of simplify the scene and lay it out on your piece of paper. And it has to be also kind of proportional to the size of the paper that you're going to work on, and mine is. So this is what it's going to be. I need this darker value at the bottom, then lighter for translucency, and then there's a bit of a shadow happening here from this wave. And that's my blueprint basically for what I will be doing. And let me just put it back, and now I can just start setting up the values. Very dark colors might wash very dark, so I don't want to really create extremely dark color, because I'd rather add my darker accents later. And I also want to look at overall wave. Like for example, there's quite a bit of light passing through that
Lana,
thinner.
I have a question. Stephanie Saxon asks, what did you use to make the value study?
Oh, that was a charcoal and just a smooth, sketchbook paper or anything, and the new pastel, white new pastel for the highlights. So, and here I'm using hard pastels right now for the block in. This very first part of the job is done with harder pastels. And I also should mention the difference between hard pastels and soft pastels. For example, let's show them. Okay, here we can see. So this one right now, you can see it's kind of like very square, hard. And this is a softer brand, though they can also be square. The softer brands, like for example, here, Cherry Ludwig, they are made square, but they're thicker. So the difference is softer pastels have less binder in them. Basically what pastel is, it's pure pigment, just kind of like what they use in oils or watercolors, but the binder is different. And with pastels, we have minimum of binder. So the color is really beautiful and quite a bit saturated if it's not added white or any other additive. So here's my foundation of the wave, and here for the top, I'm just kind of getting this light here set up. Then also this part also has some light in it. Even though we look at it and there's shadow, I'm going to start with this lighter color, and then eventually I will add the darker color on top of it. But for now, this is again for the foundation of it maybe. And also there's like the wave behind, then there's this other, it's more of a flat wave, but there's a bit of the foam starting here, but nevertheless, it's a thicker foundation of a wave. So I'm going to use a thick well, not thick, but the darker color for that as well here, but also again, back to this green to show some of that. So within the painting, one of the things that makes it a bit challenging is because now I'm just losing my drawing, basically, what I originally set up for myself, just kind of as a guideline. Now I don't really see much of it, but I'm kind of used to working that way, that I don't really get too fussy in the beginning. I know that my main development of the drawing is going to be later, and that's what I'm preparing for here. So a little bit kind of lighter area for this, and the background is going to be darker. So that is good for my wave to stand out. And there's also some of those vertical parts of the wave that have that green showing. So I'll just indicate a little bit of that, and then I will add some of the blue. So we have that. And now pretty much that I have the pigment all throughout. I think I have this, oops, touched it. Okay, kind of a little bit of a stripe developing, but it's right on the edge. I think it's because this paper is overlapping this, but that's fine, just disregard it. So I'm ready now to wash this with, let's see, maybe a little bit more right here, because we have a little bit of a sand area showing. So now that I have pigment all throughout, I'm going to take a little bit of the alcohol, rubbing alcohol they call it, or isopropyl alcohol, and mine is 70%. The higher the number on this, because it comes in like 50 or 90%, the higher the number, the faster it's drying out. And when I'm kind of dipping my brush into it, I don't want that to be dripping with that, because otherwise it will start taking all the pigment down with it. Sometimes it creates lovely drips, and some people love it. Like, for example, right now, you can see it starts going down. But I find it maybe like on larger work, it's more, makes more sense to use it, but on smaller, I kind of want to have a little bit more control. So now I started with that area of translucency first, while my brush is still pretty clean. And also I keep wiping it as I go, like I picked up all this darker color right now. I wipe it against the paper towel that I have next to me, and then again dip it in alcohol and go back to the wave. So basically what I will end up at the end of this process will be pretty much looking like watercolor. And sometimes it's looking pretty good already if it's done right, but sometimes it ends up being a little bit messy. But either way, it's not a tragedy, even if it's a little too dark or things are a little bit not in the right place, because it is under painting and it can be corrected very easily. So now I got a little bit of that light in that wave, And at this point, I can just start developing this part. So I still want to have, when I'm working on these greens, I still want to have some sort of idea about the shapes, because there's still a little bit of a difference in value or in color, temperature between different areas. So even if I don't add the foam right away, I can still differentiate from this dark is ending and maybe this is a little bit lighter. So here, let's get this grayer area that I set up. And that's it. So this paper has a bit of an edge that's not sanded. So I'm leaving that. And now let's do this. So this is where that foam is going to be, but I don't have to really do that right away, right now. And I don't want to end up with some rigid bands of color either. So, all right, I wash my brush. And now again with the cleaner brush, I'm going back into the top part, and now it's going to mix with this nice kind of like turquoise blue, dark, well, teal, I should say. Not quite turquoise, but here. And my wave starts being kind of like coming forward against the darker background. So that's what the setup is, and actually it's drying pretty fast. It's almost dry at this point, and I want to kind of have a little bit of a softer edges wherever possible with this technique, because harder edges, I like adding them later. So that's it. And now the paper can buckle a little bit. So if you have any questions right now while this is drying, that's a good time to ask. It's going to be like about a couple minutes for this to dry, because you definitely want it to dry before you start working with pastels, with dry pastels on it. And first layers I'm going to do on this is going to be again with hard pastels. I have quite a collection of this. Well, let me show you the whole tray of these little treasures. And there's just different colors. The hard pastels, they are less expensive than soft pastels. And of course it makes sense because there's less pigment in them, because there's more binder. And they are very useful. They allow to make harder edges when needed, and definitely write the signature.
Lana, one question. What kind of paper are you using?
That's Art Spectrum Color Fix, that's called, and this was white. Usually I buy that paper toned, like it comes in different colors, but this one was white, and I had like a few pieces of it, and I decided to use this one for that. It was a good size. And it's sanded paper, like I was showing before. If you work on the side of the stick, you get the texture. So, and it starts drying pretty much. There's just a few marks here, but soon I will start working over this. I don't want to do it right away, but just want to make sure it dries. And it dries a little bit lighter, like watercolor does. But meanwhile, I can just think about the colors that I'm going to use. And for the darker, for the foundation, over here, like I like this kind of olive green color for the very bottom part of it. And I will be working very light over this. So another thing I can do at this point is kind of figure out what my foam pattern is going to be. So for that, I would take maybe something like this. It's kind of lilac color, more blue, and figure out the main kind of design of the foam. So I don't want to do the small pieces with this, but if there's anything that's major, if I want to indicate that, that would be a good time. Why I don't want to do small pieces, because then I would have this light pigment and I would have to kind of color my darker pigment into it, and which is kind of counterintuitive. But with a larger shape, I can still work a little bit around this and then just this having as an indicator. And then later I would, let's say, take this softer pastel at that point and just add this foam over. So for me, it's just kind of as a blueprint, as a guide, but not as a coloring book outline, because that would look kind of artificial. So I don't really have that many patches of foam in this one, so the rest is kind of pretty small. Maybe a little bit here, but that will come later. Something maybe like here, when on the second kind of mid wave, that's where I can establish that, and there will be this foam right here. So that can help me. So the main idea also kind of using my marks to imply the movement of the water. So it's not just, going straight up, because that wouldn't describe the wave, but having it actually a little bit on diagonal, that's what shows the curvature of the wave. And also with the foam, as it's rising and as it's silhouetted against translucent part, it's going to look lighter itself. So, well, I think it's all dry pretty much at this point, maybe a little bit at the top still, but right now I can continue working with this. So just to establish a little bit of this greener pigment, and this is the reference was taken on Long Island, and our water tends to have more green in it than maybe other places. So that's why there's green in here. And then I just want to set up this green in the distance before I start adding blues to that, to get that. Because when we look at the wave, if the water is rising vertically, we're going to see more of that local color in it. And probably at this point, it's time to start kind of working in softer pastels as well. Particularly on this paper, it's kind of rougher. Very often I work on UART paper. Those who work with pastels, that's this type of paper, and 400 is just number, Greek number. And it's a little bit kind of denser, smoother texture. This one is a little bit grittier, so it is harder to work on grittier paper with hard pastels and get a rich color that way. So I will be switching to softer pastels at this point and kind of start adding that a little bit. I don't blend too much, but you did see me doing that here. Here, particularly on the top part to show this color in the waves. And I don't think I did it anywhere else really that much yet, but usually I just like to get the layers of color accumulate, and as they do, they kind of start smoothing each other. So usually much blended is not even needed, but a little bit sometimes is necessary. So what I want to indicate right now, maybe with this color, not the blue, it's this point where the water, the foam kind of, the way it turns and the foam starts dropping down. So we have this a little bit of a design happening. So then it goes like this. And there's some of that green showing at the top, but it starts being a little darker. Oops. And again, sometimes you just need to make it smoother in the areas where it just has to look smoother, like top of the wave, like this, it's very sleek. And that's why instead of layering too many layers of pastel and trying to achieve that, sometimes it's just easier to do it this way. And I have that light within it and maybe a little bit more kind of setting that up. And what I'm also doing as I'm working, I'm working gloves, and as I put the stick down, I wipe my glove and before I pick another one, and this way I keep my color cleaner. So, and that's important, otherwise it's just going to get difficult to see what sticks I have, what color they are. So now it's, you can probably see this is their softer pastel, and it richer, the color is richer. The darker, it's more intense. So that's the beauty of the softer sticks. So they have this more concentrated pigment, and that's why the color looks the way it is. So there's also on the more horizontal surface of the wave, there's going to be more of a kind of blue reflection of the blue or blue-gray, and that's what I want to indicate, a little bit of that as well. Particularly here on the shallow wave. And in the distance, I also need to start separating that part from the wave, and I will start with somewhat darker color, kind of purple, blue purple. And then a little bit lighter as I keep working.
So we have a couple questions.
Sure.
Okay, so the first question, do you limit your palette? If so, how many different colors do you use?
Usually I don't limit my palette. I don't usually pre-select it. For the purpose of the demos, I do pick them. I started doing that because it just takes extra time to go back and forth to my main palette. But usually I just work with, I look at my box and look at the colors and just decide case by case what I need. Though some artists work the other way. They kind of do set up a certain limit if it's, the box is certain size and that's the way it is. But I just found that I keep looking in both places then, in the box still and in the pre-selected area. I just, at this point, I think I worked enough to know what I need basically, and it's easier. If you're just starting out, it's probably a good idea to limit yourself. How many? I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's different different techniques, different ways of working require different numbers. Like sometimes we have the color that we need right away, but sometimes we need to layer a few. So if you don't have those colors that you actually need close to that, you might end up needing more colors because you need to layer them. So I hope that answered.
Yes, I think so. I also
Okay.
have another question.
Sure.
What type of soft pastels are you using?
Well, it's a mix. I have a lot of brands at this point. I actually even did my own selection. They worked with me, the Richardson pastels. I have several sets with them, but I find that I don't really limit myself to a particular brand usually. I love Terry Ludwig. I love Mount Vision. The difference is the Mount Vision, for example, is a bit firmer. Terry Ludwig is pretty soft, like this one's Terry Ludwig, for example. And they have this square edge, which comes in very handy in some situations. But it's, they all have different qualities, and it's kind of fun to explore different brands, and you end up kind of knowing intuitively what you might need for certain subject or certain way of handling it. So right now I'm setting up this background, and because it's basically it's just a background, but I still wanted to have the illusion of like some waves starting, the beginning of that, some water showing there, and then between the waves there's a lighter blue color, because when it's horizontal water, it's going to reflect more sky, and it's going to show up as blue, lighter blue. So that's why here I definitely, to show that movement of the water, I definitely want to capture that idea that it's going to have lighter planes, and it's going to also have those greens, for example. And in the distance, it's also a good idea to tone it down a little bit to kind of let the aerial perspective work its magic. So it looks like it's receding. Sometimes it's a little bit grayer. There's not as much here. I didn't leave as much space here. So I'm not going to worry about creating that, that kind of feeling of aerial perspective too much. But that would be one of the considerations at that point. So now that I have this set up, I can start working with my main wave a little bit more, a little bit closer. So something important here is kind of have a nice transition from that darker green, so it doesn't sit by itself. I want them to merge a little bit more gracefully. And that's where I need to pay attention to values. And then of course there's a certain texture within that wave as well. So I have to look at that too. So basically this is the area where we have that nice green. And then there's also like this flat wave. It also has some of that warmer green within it as it's rising, but it is a bit darker. And let's add a little bit more of like olive color maybe to that part. So I have that contrast between warmer green, cooler green at the bottom of that wave. And let's see, this might be a little too light. So basically all I'm doing at first is just setting up these major shapes. And then the foam is kind of like a frosting on a cake. So that's what it feels like. And here's this other wave, very small one, but it has this nice shining inside. So it does contribute to the overall effect, kind of balancing it out. And that's why I like this composition here. So, okay, at this point, I can start setting up the foam. And for the foam, I'm going to take this somewhat purple color, kind of bluish purple. And there is a shadow here on this side. And if I work lightly over this green, I will have that light green peeking through and still having that feeling of luminosity inside the wave, but also showing that there is a shadow. And same thing here, I can start picking up this thickness at the top and start creating with this same color. I think it's working out pretty well for this foam. Kind of, yeah, see that too. And it is important when we paint a wave, kind of have a certain rhythm, building a certain rhythm with it. And sometimes I would push it more than it is in a picture, because if I just have it all flat, it's kind of a little bit less interesting. If I get a little bit more kind of like up, down, up again, then it's translates into more movement in your work, in the composition. So that's why sometimes I would just exaggerate certain things just to create a better flow in the painting. And here, and it can be very subtle, but it might be enough to, it doesn't have to be very dramatic. Dramatic sometimes or often is more interesting, it's nice, but even a little bit sometimes goes a long way. So let's see what's on. And this part is very light, but I want it to be a little bit less yellow. And then the idea of chroma comes into play here as well. So I don't use grays for something that's supposed to be luminous. So I have to pick the right chroma. And this one, by the way, is hard pastel again. Hard pastel also is a great blending tool, basically. So when you already have some pigment, soft pigment on the paper or on the surface, because it's not always paper, sometimes it's on board, you can push a little bit with a hard pastel and achieve some of that effect, kind of blending look, blended look, I should say. So this right now, kind of creating this lighter value areas that emphasizes that thin water at the top. And now I can probably get this blue, because now well, before I do that, there's still, I think, a little bit darker color right here. And it is an area of kind of visual, that contrast, value contrast, and just emphasizing the value contrast here would be a good idea, because then I overlay on top of it this blue foam, and this is going to be more noticeable on a kind of nicer, darker background. So this is my this part of foam, this particular one. And there is also like some movement within that, and it's kind of like a calligraphy. And that's why it's fun to paint those things. It's, you can just twist your hand and get interesting effects and what's happening there. And then at the bottom, I probably want even a little bit darker blue. So we have the variety, and we can see some texture in that foam. And here as well. So if I'm just using one color, then it might start looking flat at some point. But using this variation of colors, that shows that something is deeper recessed, something is at the top, getting more light. So that's a good way to look at it. And let's start setting up a bit of a foam here in shadow. So there are these little bits of foam. They are not as dramatic as sometimes we see them, but all I want to do is basically set their direction and show that they describe that curvature of the foam. And here, kind of have that suggestion of that as well, though I don't want to overcomplicate this particular area because I have this other feature. So that would be just a hint, but something that's not competing with the main part. And like this can be going direction like this. Then maybe we'll pick up a little bit here just to show the overall movement. And that actually is getting a pretty good setup for this wave. And before I start working too much on it, though I still probably want to add just a little bit of that darker blue. But once it's looking all right, I want to start working on other parts of the wave as well. So I don't just get stuck in one place, finish something to a point where it's just looking, well, not perfect, but overdone, let's say. I like to move all around the painting when I'm working, and I find it to be a good good habit to do this. So the next thing that I would be doing is working on the foam on this part, on the middle part. So here we have some of that foam lit up, but also some of it still kind of like a bit grayer color. So I need to figure out the color that I want to use should be lighter than I was using in the shadow. But even on a very sunlit area, I kind of want to start with something maybe a little bit darker than what I will have eventually as an accent. And then there are parts here kind of parts of this foam are going to be turned more towards the sun, and other parts are going to be turned away a little bit more. So they will be darker, maybe a darker blue, or maybe a little bit more of this, using this kind of purplish color. So the idea is to have these different value, but still showing the difference. So eventually, when I have the highlight on the foam, and let me see, maybe I'll use this as well. I also want to use the temperature, the difference in temperature to indicate that they turn towards the sunlight. And you can see probably how I'm working on the side of the stick, but just lightly touching it, for example, creates this very textured surface. And that's what I like about this paper. You can just suggest a lot of texture just by varying the pressure and working on the side of the stick. And for the seascape with all that foam, I think it's working out pretty well, being able to do that. So there's a little bit more of a kind of thicker part over here. And usually I don't just want to repeat exactly what's there, but see if it's actually doing much good to what I actually ended up with on my surface here. But it seems to work for that, and that's what I want to do. So here I also want to indicate this foam. It's kind of a little odd, kind of having this element and this foam, but I kind of thought that maybe it's okay. So just having that. And then I will switch again to this a little bit darker blue. So again, it doesn't compete too much with the lighter elements. And that's shaping up as my foam kind of stretched along this shallow wave. And then if I have time, I can just go and kind of shape these areas a little bit better and see if I want to have more emphasis on certain areas. But again, right now, I'm just going, moving around. So this looks like it's holding up. Now this setup, and here's the foreground. So I have to do that now. There's a bit of a shadow here, quite pronounced. So I'm going to add that. And let's see what this does. So we have the shadow at the bottom here, but the middle of the wave is showing that light. So I have to keep that. And then actually there's a little bit more of that darker color that's showing through here. And I'll make it a little bit warmer as well. And I like the seascape because it's still kind of half abstract thing that you can change elements just to kind of try to create better composition or experiment. And now let's get a little bit more of that blue reflecting into the clear water. So, but we also have that light foam reflecting into the surface. So that would be probably better done with this grayer color, maybe at some point. Okay, now the foam in front of this. And actually, let's connect this to the top. So this one is actually kind of like pinkish, purplish light color, kind of very light, warm lilac. And I use those colors. And sometimes people then reply, I would never think of using that, but it works. But to me, it's more about the temperature, color temperature that I want to achieve, rather than like some standard accepted bright color in the seascape. So, and it seems to work quite well for those effects. So here we get a little bit more light right here in the corner. So this marks, and then I'll have the lighter pastel. That's for setup. And let's see where else the highlight, right here maybe. Not so much here. And I think also kind of setting up this lighter color right behind this glowing wave. That could be a good way to do it too. Because then it stands out more. Okay, then what I will have now is this thinner, kind of very thin layer of foam. And I'm going to use somewhat kind of like light blue, but still not the lightest color. So, and it has sun on it, this area, but at the same time, it's not very thick. So it's not showing as bright, not very bright here. And of course, there will be some pattern within it as well. And then within that, there will be some lighter areas, but also a little bit of sand maybe as well. So that would be, let's say something like this maybe. Just to add a little bit of that brown here at the edge. And then at the edge, it is warmer. It is kind of warmer color, but also it has a bit of a shadow at the bottom. So there's also not just kind of like the line, but there's a bit of a separation from the sand. But I have to make sure it's not just going as one continuous line, and definitely not as a straight line, because that wouldn't be interesting at all. And let's see, if I use this color right now, I can create this kind of puffy edge to emphasize that area. It is a little bit brighter there, and maybe kind of merge it a little bit with the the darker, actually lighter blue, but that's somewhat darker color. So at this point, let's just connect this a little bit more together. And it's also sometimes like working with a foam, sometimes it's more effective to blend it a little bit, so not everything is so aggressively textured. So in some areas particularly, it might be a good idea to kind of push it into the surface. But if I do that, I want to wipe my glove after that, so I don't necessarily just go around all over with that same color. And that would look kind of too monotonous, and we'll start making the color dirtier in different areas. Okay, that's for that. And the actual front part, it has some water on it as well. So right now I have kind of this purplish grayish color, but if I add some of this blue, that would show kind of like reflecting sky into that very wet area. And we know that it's very reflective. And it also allows me to set up this edge. I can come in closer to the foam in some areas and let it be more kind of thicker in others. Looks a little too yellow, so I want to make it lighter. So for that, let's see if I use this. Well, this is whiter. And also another part to remember, that if it's kind of smoother surface here, then if the foam comes close enough to the sand, it will start reflecting into this wet surface. And I can set up this as well as a reflection by doing this. So something like that. And this immediately kind of connects that area with what's at the top of it. So things like this, when we have them happening, they kind of unify the whole painting a little bit more. So now here, having this very dark purple is really not serving it. Maybe this shadow should be lighter. And another thing we can do, like for example, if I end up, and which kind of starts looking like this, if I end up with too much of this white pigment or very light pigment, and it looks like I start losing my openings in the water, I can take a brush, and that's a bristle brush, and I can just start restoring maybe some of that darker initial pigment. It's not going to be that clean color that I had in the beginning because we already put pastel on it. So the brush is still going to kind of push the pigment further, but it will brush off this lighter color, sometimes more successfully than the other times, but it definitely allows to bring a little bit more of this texture back. But then I would have to go in and maybe refine that a little bit more. And I feel like there should be a little bit more of this darker blue, particularly in this area. So this is exactly what I usually try to avoid when I try to paint around this lighter element, basically, because then it will start looking like it's cut out. So to avoid that, we usually work from darker to light, and as much as possible, try not to go back and start making things darker, but that's exactly what I'm doing right now, if you can see this. So, but it's good to see what happens. And I just wanted to show this as well, that it's possible to come back and restore some of the color. I tell my students about this more efficient ways to work with pastels, and then sometimes I see them freezing. They're afraid to kind of experiment with color, but we do need to experiment. We need to see what's happening with color and how to restore it. So this ended up actually pretty good. Pretty clean color I got back. So what do I do now with this? I still want to bring that foam back, and that's why I'm going to take this again. And maybe just this time suggest it more lightly, but I really didn't want this line to happen. Okay, that worked. So there it is. And what I actually want also to touch up, how right now I like, this is a little bit darker grays, kind of. This is lighter, but I want to indicate a little bit more variation within that foam. So we have some of the darker color, kind of like this. Areas facing away from the sun more. So this way I start giving that illusion of the surface changing angle. And that's what makes it look more three-dimensional. So now let's finish these highlights on this foam because it does have some nice highlights, and that would be done with this lighter color. So some of it is here. To watch the direction, like this shouldn't really curve this way. If anything, it should be going that way. But because when we make marks, it's the hand just goes certain way easier than the other. That happens. So let's get this. Okay, so at this point, I want to start refining a little bit more the wave. And let's see if I can make a little bit even lighter blue here. And so, by the way, I'm working on a course, video course, just want to mention, that's going to be all devoted to painting waves and different elements. So if you are interested in that, you can sign up for my newsletter on the website, on my website, and I will be announcing it soon. And now I'm bringing more lights. So I usually want to wait for this really bright light accents until I'm really sure about the background and other parts here, so that I don't have to do what I was trying to do there, kind of remove the pigment, then go back. And the result might be that it becomes chalky. So that's that type of accent you want to add later when you're actually ready for that. So here at the very edge, I want to kind of get that thicker foam indicated by this darker blue, and maybe like here, it almost merges with that, but there will be white kind of separating them a little bit. And overall, I do like that kind of lilac or very warm lilac color there inside. So it looks quite luminous. And maybe just a little bit more here, this part where the glow is happening. Modify that a little bit more. Let's see what else here. So at the top, the foam here actually is quite light, but then it picks up some of this blue color as it goes lower, goes into the shadow. But I also want to keep that lighter green somewhat showing through that. And then let's just merge it, but making a little bit darker here at the top. And again, that's the area where I don't mind blending it a little bit. Then I have this little tool that's a piece of plastic, and it allows me to soften the edges and do something like this. If I want to kind of remove a little bit of pigment, just a little, but it doesn't really remove the pigment, it just kind of blends it with the areas around. So it's not a really good tool to correct the mistakes, but it's rather allowing to blend certain areas or soften the edge. So at this point, it's really more about refining things. It's kind of having these little details, kind of bringing those in, looking closer. And probably same color here to show how it's lighter over that glowing area. So things like this usually would take some time to kind of go around and step back, see what's working. So let's get this maybe a little bit lighter color right here. No, not light enough. Let's take, no. All right, let's take this light, very light color and try to get this lighter area at the top. Because that's where the water kind of starts separating into this streaks of foam, eventually streaks, but so it has that light color. Sometimes you almost see a line there happening. And if I use this warmer green, it looks really nice and warm, but I can use also a little bit cooler color. But that continues that lighter glow into it. So let's see, this is soft pastel now, and I want to see if I can get a little bit more of this. Okay, like this. Maybe getting a little bit too far with it, but now I kind of need to get that back, the transition of that greener color. Okay, that works better. So if I take now lighter color, since I already have my darker blues, kind of couple of blues established there. So now I can get a little bit more texture within that. Maybe let's switch to this one. And seems a little bit harder, this stick, even though it's cherry laundry, but seems a little bit harder. What I also can do, take a little bit different blue, for example, the greener blue, and that just by the virtue of being different blue is going to stand out a little bit more against that. But it's not light enough. Here, this turquoise will do that. If I want to create that little bit of texture within that shadow, but not going into the light colors. Just switching the color temperature will allow me to achieve that effect. So now for those highlights, again, because there's a nice kind of ruffled edge on this foam, so I can now start bringing that in with a value contrast, but I have to remember that it's only at the top part where I have the sun on it, and then at the bottom, it's darker. It's that blue color again. So here we can start picking up some of this elements, creating so maybe like coming up this way. And again, you usually want to kind of spend a little bit of time figuring out how much of this you need, because it's easy to overdo. But kind of stepping back, taking a look at that. I can also do the brush to show the effect, creating the spray with a brush. So we can take a look at that. But basically, working just with a stick, I can create the spray just by going over like this. And I used blue for this particular one here. But when I do the spray with a brush, we'll do with a lighter color. So we see that. So now I can go around this edge and start bringing light into it and separate it a little bit from that area. So not all of it should be really, this is kind of this very light yellowish white, but I should start probably with a cooler colors, so I leave those warmer highlights as highlights, not just repeated all over the painting. And here we have that edge, kind of the foam, but it's interrupted in some areas. I don't want it to look the same all around. And maybe like here doing this. So somewhere here, let's say there's more light and that shadow ends, and that light shows. I still would like to get kind of more light on the water. And for that, I can use some of the blue turquoise maybe. So, yeah. So not everything is just like blue all around. It kind of adds a bit more of a spark on that blue. And of course, you don't want, if you start setting up the foam, you don't want to start going back into the background, because that should be set and you don't want to mess with it. So that is done at the last moment, usually.
So we have a question.
Sure.
What is the little plastic piece you use?
Yeah, it's kind of part of either old credit card or some of those fake ones that they send in the mail. and they're very convenient to use for this. Like they have that rounded edge. Oh, kind of this. You know, all those cards. You just cut a piece, and because it's so rounded, it's nice. It's not scratching the paper too bad. So just that. Okay, so I have that a little bit lighter, and I think it does a better job. And then this part really here, I need to work a little bit more on that. Like right now, that edge, I need to make sure it looks, first of all, kind of a little bit smoother at the top. And then what's also happening, we see usually a little bit of, if it is smooth and if it is blue sky day, we see a bit of a blue reflecting at the very top of it. So, kind of like this. So might want to just a little bit blend that with the on top of the green. Similar thing would be here as well. So I can just take this again, should have done it before I started doing that spray, but just for the purpose of showing that, I'm going to overlap it. So there's a bit of a blue reflecting on the top of a smooth edge. Wouldn't be here so much because it's not that kind of smooth curving area, but we definitely see it at here at these areas like this. So that's, and then let's see if this one works for. Maybe needs to be more green. So let's try this. And the more I paint, the more I paint waves, particularly, the more I kind of want to leave them a little bit more kind of to the interpretation. Just make bolder marks and let the viewer finish some of it. So not kind of trying to overdo. Trying to explain every single fold in the wave. And it works actually better sometimes because you want to create the energy in a seascape. You don't just want to, well, I don't, maybe some other people work differently, of course, but to me, it's kind of, you create the energy, and the energy from my hand is translating into that painting. So I want my marks to create that energy. If I start smoothing everything down, I lose that. And sometimes that happens. And in that case, quite often I just made bolder marks again, and that breathes that life into it again. So we all paint in different way. No, it's a little too dark now, this one. Let's try this. Has a little bit more purple. And here we are. Okay, so I think I'm getting pretty close to where I wanted to take this. But let's do that spray with the toothbrush before I overwork it too much. Okay, just a moment. And what I'm using for the spray is just a toothbrush. I have a dedicated spray toothbrush, and then same thing. I use the alcohol, just dip the brush into it, and then I take soft white pastel. And once I do that, right now it's dry, but I want to show it on a dry. So once it's dipped into that alcohol, and then I will be rubbing it against this soft white pastel. Once it has that on, then I will point it at where I want that spray to go and will release it towards me. So I will be pulling that towards me, but because they release in that direction, that will fly the other way. So that's the basic, but it's kind of a good idea maybe if you don't want it to fly all around the place, all around your painting, but want to be in a certain spot, might be a good idea to cover maybe with a piece of paper while you're doing that, the other areas. I'm not going to, but here's what I will be doing. And here it is. So it's kind of quick way to do that. You don't want to overdo it because then it's just kind of becomes too dense, and kind of too much of a good thing is always not as good, ends up not to be as good. But I let it dry, and what I usually end up doing, just maybe still trying to be kind of like later, come in and see, now that I have that spray floating in the air, now I can still see like where maybe I need a little bit of that brighter sparkle somewhere, or this is a little too much now. I'm starting to get carried away. Like that thick, you don't want it that thick, but maybe like not that far, but here it's fine. So It's kind of a process like this. And on a large painting, you just end up doing a lot of this spray, and then maybe consolidating it. Sometimes I did it twice, but on a small work, it's pretty much one time. And like I said, you want to do it after you have this whole area resolved. You don't want to know that it's in there. You don't want like, okay, I still want that bloom to be a little bit lighter. No, it just would destroy all that effort that I already put into it, setting this up. And usually you want it to dry as well before you go back for any kind of changes. So like right now I start going into it, but I should usually let it sit for some time before I do anything like this. But let's say if I wanted to kind of add a little bit more texture here, can do that. So after the spray, it's a little easier to see, like, do I still need a little bit more of a kind of single strains of the foam. Or did the spray bring enough interest, or is it strong enough accent, basically? Well, I decided to add a little bit more of this very light turquoise for the translucency part. And I think it's working. All right, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to achieve here in a demo time. And if I, go more into this, I would be just kind of trying to get maybe a little bit more of a texture here, maybe getting some of that foam reflected better into the surface here and into the smoother surface, kind of like that. And let's do just a little bit of that smoother. That's it. All right. So do you have any questions about this or any thoughts? I know it's typical, right? I say that things are finished, and as many artists, we just keep going at it. But I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Michelle Fucarino, how do you fix the final?
Fix, I usually don't fix. You mean like a spray or something? I usually just frame it. I give it a pat on the back or just vertically shake it against the surface. And then I just, if it's sold, in a gallery setting, then yes, it's framed, but I just usually, most often I sell them online and I just let the customer put it in a frame. So I just put the glassine over that actually I can show you. Here's, oops. Here's the painting, for example, on the glassine. And that's just how it's kept. It's right now on a foam core with the glassine taped over it. And that's how it's staying. Fixing, they say right now they do have better fixatives, the ones that don't make your work darker. But I kind of didn't really get into that. I tried it in the beginning of my pastel experience, and it just darkened the surface too much, and I got all scared. Didn't try again for quite some time, but now people say that I think that French Latour fixative, that might be a good one. But the suggestion would be try it on something to test it first, and from a distance, don't come close. Make sure it's not clogged so it doesn't leave blotches on your work.
Okay, so we just have a couple of comments. Christine Ballot says beautiful.
Thanks.
Deborah Ahern said, what a beautiful pastel painting and a pleasure to watch such a talented artist show us how to develop a painting.
Thank you. Thanks. So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Does anyone else have any more questions? Give it a minute maybe to see if anyone else is interested in asking. Okay, so Michelle for Karina said, where did you study?
Stony Brook. But then actually I didn't, well, I took one class in pastel at Stony Brook, but didn't really feel much about pastel because, you know, the instructor just wasn't really inspiring, I'm sorry to say. But then I just kind of got into it myself, and I just learned a lot from looking at the pastel journals and whatever I could find online, my favorite artists, and just seeing how their work is done, what they're doing, or getting their books, learning like that. So it's a journey.
So Michelle says again, she studied there too, and your work is beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anyone else want to ask a question?
No questions? All right. So anybody is working in pastels, or my question? I know a lot of people do oils, but pastels is still kind of not as many, but it is such a beautiful, beautiful medium and such a pleasure to work with. So I'm really enjoying that.
Michelle says she works in watercolor.
Okay, yeah, very different medium. I love watercolor, love to see it, but I'm too impatient. Like with pastel, I can go over, start with kind of vague idea and develop it. With watercolor, I feel like you need to know right from the start where you want to be, and it's kind of intimidating.
So Michelle said her struggle is not getting pastels too muddy.
Well, yeah, that's, you know, once you get that value idea about that, how to layer colors of the same or very similar values and not go back and forth from dark to light and backwards, that helps. Just kind of keeping vigilant about values, not to mix very different ones together.
Christine Ballot said, I paint in both pastel and oil. I love Unison, some Terry Ludwig and Sennelier. I have never worked on pastel matte.
Well, this is not pastel matte. Those are great brands, by the way. I love those. Pastel matte, I tried that. This one is Art Spectrum. It's actually rougher, quite a bit rougher surface. But what's interesting about pastel matte, I usually was considering it's like, oh, it's very smooth. They even recommend it for working with pen pastels, which is kind of like you work with a sponge basically. It's like a makeup dish with a pigment like that for blending. But when I tried pastel matte, it actually grabs the pigment very, very much. So you don't get much texture with that, not as much, but it really holds the pigment. And that's actually, in answer kind of, again, about that fixing the pastel, because I work mostly on sanded paper, sanded surface. Sanded surface retains the pigment very well. If it's non-sanded, that might be a bit more of a problem because it's easier to flake off. But with sanded surface, I shipped them to competitions, I shipped them to customers, and like meaning framed ones, and it was fine. It wasn't really though it does happen sometimes that it it's happened to one of the artists I know that the UPS didn't do a good job handling it, and the top layer basically came off, kind of dust up into the glass. So that wasn't nice, but more often than not, they do just fine.
I have a couple more questions here. Leslie Barnett is asking, I'm wondering how your approach to your initial sketch to give it so much more, sorry, I'm wondering how your initial sketch to give it so much more life than the photo.
Thank you. I love that. Yes, like sometimes people, would say it as a compliment that, oh, it looks just like a photo, but it's never really a compliment. So I really appreciate you saying that. And well, the sketch, like nothing is ever perfect. And definitely waves, they just, they happen. So you just want to get the composition more engaging. Here, I didn't really have to do that much, but I was talking about like, maybe like I lifted this up a little bit more as far as composition. So it just has a little bit more movement maybe than this, looks a little more flat. Then you emphasize certain diagonals maybe over the horizontals. So that helps. But then I also, have to give credit to pastels because that bright, amazingly vibrant pigment just makes a lot of things look nice.
Joanne Kenwood said, thank you. This was really informative and it's a medium that I want to learn more about.
Great, wonderful. I'm glad to hear that.
And then Michelle Fucurino says, do you also combine media like gouache?
I did a little bit with gouache. I didn't really combine it, but I'm thinking about using gouache more. So I've seen really nice work done in gouache lately, and it just seems a nice medium because it's opaque. I seem to be not doing as well with transparent watercolor, but with gouache, it's a little bit, more familiar too for me. So I might, but I know some people combine it. They would do, let's say, that underpainting kind of with gouache and then do the pastel on top. So that would be an interesting approach.
Christine Ballot says, I hear pastel matte is more for pan pastel.
What's the question about?
It's about the pastel matte. She said she heard
yes,
pan pastel.
Yes, well, yes, but because they promoted the pen pastel promotes pastel matte as being really good for their surface, but that's not just for that. It's actually pretty nice surface. Like I said, it's just smoother. but a lot of people who work with sticks, not necessarily pan pastels, they can get amazing results on that paper. So it's not just for that, but it does work for pan pastels really well.
Michelle Facarino says, I learned a lot from watching your layers of colors. The sand is stunning. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Great.
Okay. I think we got all the questions,
Good.
I believe. Yeah, I think so. Is there any, does anyone else have any more questions? Okay. All right. I think that is probably all the questions answered.
Okay. So I'm glad the webcam seemed to behave. I see the color. I kept looking at the screen. The colors actually seem to be pretty good.
Yes, I think they did come out well.
Yeah, because I had a bad experience. It did manage to kind of get it better, but the whites were really kind of getting too light. But this, I kept looking at it and it seems to hold up. It's still a little bit darker. Should be a little bit darker, those blues, particularly in the shadows, they are on the foam, but overall it still has the idea of what I was doing.
And Christine Ballot just says, thank you for a wonderful demo.
I'm glad. You're very welcome. Thanks for joining.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. So we'd like to thank Lana Ballot for her wonderful demonstration of painting seascapes with pastels. We hope you found it both engaging and informative. We should also like to thank First Republic Private Wealth Management again for their generous sponsorship of tonight's program. And I just want to let you know that our next lecture will be on July 15th, and it will be on the French painter Bouguereau. This will be given by our instructor, Bill Graff. Please look out for our email about this lecture and other upcoming events and classes. Thank you and good night.